Well, hello everyone. Good morning, ladies, gentlemen, other kinds of biological beings in the room. First of all, thank you. Thank you to the organizers, Uri, Mary, Lydia, Andrea, and also, of course, all the volunteers that have made this possible. It's not only, I think, of a lot of effort, I guess, but it's also a lot of love that they have put in it. So I will try to go through this conversation, this idea of cartographers of our time, that is mainly mapping what is going to happen and how we relate to this perception of time, to this perception of how we can look ahead and look back. Right? My name is Pau Garcia. I know it's a kind of a tricky name here in Portugal. Nevertheless, it works for me for a very long time. It means peace in Catalan. And the focus of my work, I'm a professor at the Elisava, the design school in Barcelona, and the School of Visual Arts in New York, as well as the school, Barcelona Economics School. And I work both in teaching and my focus of the work is specifically on domestic data streamers. I'm one of the founding partners. It's a team of over 30 people, from artists, coders, from all these very different disciplines. And we work mainly in three different spaces, spaces that are very important today. One is arts and culture, the other one is human rights and social transformation, and the third one is technology. Technology as understood as one of the most important disruptors for our society. Right. So but most of the work we do is mainly based on research on information and technology and the impact that it has in human beings and society, transparency portals, ethnographic research, and what we call info experiences. How information is translated and transformed into new languages, into new ways to perceive data. But today I wanted to talk specifically not so much about the work we do at Domestic, even though there will be a couple of cases and examples, but about something that is a bit bigger. This is an image of the James Webb Space Telescope. This is the biggest image we have ever taken of the universe. Right? Never in history there has been an image that encapsulated more space, a bigger map of the universe than this one, right? I was listening to this interview, this beautiful interview from Stephen Wolfram. For the ones that doesn't know him, he's the father of modern computing science, right? He's a very important person in the space of theoretical physics also. And he really focused on computing, in trying to understand the world. He said something that I say is truly beautiful. He said, the universe computes itself at its maximum speed. Right? What it means by that is that you can only experience the universe by living it. There is not enough material or the kind of situations, environmental situations, to reproduce what is going in the universe in an artificial way. To see the universe happen, to see the time go through, we have to just live the time to go through. So that's, of course, a very complicated thing for us humans to accept, because we are curious. We want to know what will happen next. Right? We want to be able to go back in time. Right? But this is, of course, very problematic, because there is a limitation in the way we can actually move ourselves through time. So put that, for example, if there is a person that is falling, and we want to actually compute this, render it, try to analyze it and perform full calculations, we will need a computer that will probably exhaust all the resources in the world. Right? The size of this computer to recreate this scene at its full 360 completion, it's too big. Why? Because we cannot reproduce all the biological chemistry behind the dress, the physics behind the, let's call it the gravity in it, the materiality of the stairs, the light and reflection of everything, the three-dimensional space of it. Right? It's too complex. So, as we are curious and we want to calculate it, we have discovered so many different ways to do it. Right? The first one is to reduce it, to transform all these things into numbers, into data points, into statistics, right? And this is somehow the basis of science. Science is focused in reductionism, in transforming reality, the universe out there, into small things, things that can be computed, things that are somehow small enough so we can operate them and see what's happening next, right? But of course, there is always a cost in reducing reality, right? If we are slicing reality, we are leaving things apart of it. For me, the best example is the map, right? The map, how many of you have used a map during the last week? Can you raise your hands? Yes, like this, we can say it's quite one of the modern contemporary things of our daily life that we use in a very ubiquitous way. Like we use it all the time. Maps are very functional. Maps, by the way, are the ultimate form and shape of reductionism. Right? There is this beautiful story of Borges, Jorge Luis Borges, and he's an amazing poet and writer, and he wrote an essay that is called on the rigorosity of science, right? And he said that there was like, it's a tale, and he said, there is this kingdom that have this beautiful guild of cartographers, and they are so obsessed with making a good work that they want to create like the ultimate map. They want to create a map that is so exact with the reality that the size of the map is the size of the country itself. So, of course, it's very problematic for people to use it because every stone is there, every tree is there. So to actually operate through the map, you have to go through the country, right? This somehow shows why it's so important to reduce and the functionality that we get at reducing it. But it have so many other problematics, right? When we are reducing things, we are starting to leave things out of the visualization of the things that we can perceive, right? So if we want to get here, probably some of you have used Google Maps to get here, we will start to see that certain things. We will not see the homeless person that is actually living here, but we will see El Corte Inglés probably, right? So the things that are visible in maps are not always just because they are functional. Sometimes they follow different interests, and we have to be aware of which are these interests, right? Of course, in this case, Corte Inglés pays a lot to be there in the map, but there are things that has not been paid, that are more ideologic. One of the most important transformation of maps and cartography was the transformation from the geocentric perspective of the world from Bartholomew Beaumont. That was like the 1560s. Like the transformation to the Copernican wall, to this idea that the human was not at the center of everything. This was, of course, kind of a very challenging thing to swallow for the church at that point, because they said, come on, God has created us. We are the ultimate creation of God. Like all the universe should revolve around us. Right? That's the logic behind it. But the Copernican world system would say, no, we humans are just like a satellite of a satellite of a satellite of a distant galaxy. And this is, of course, like kind of a second, I don't know, character in the story, which is kind of annoying if you believe in such a main plot character scheme. And of course, the maps have somehow altered our perception of time and space too. This is the Mercator map. It was actually, it's a very old map, but it's still, this is more like 400 centuries old, but it's still the map that is hanged today in the secondary schools all over the world. Right? The problem with this map, probably this is the map that we have all learned to read and understand the world with. The problem with this map is that it's not a true depiction of the world, because the world is not kind of a cylinder, right? So you cannot make a perfect map like this. The problem with this map is that it's like the world is more like a sphere, well, like a potato, actually. So to put it in bidimensional, you have to make some corrections that the Mercator map didn't did. An example of this is how certain countries, specifically from the north, they have been actually grow like created like this idea of growth. And this has been told us since the beginning of history, like since we are kids. They show us in images that it's a bit more perverse because they are not saying us, hey, this is bigger than this other thing, right? No, this is like kind of something more complex because it's subtle. It's just an image, right? And you believe it because it's the big map of the world, right? So of course, this follows certain interest. And these interests are not only the interests as geopolitical interests, but are the interests of the people building the maps. Who is building the map is the one that gets the most of this map, right? And our perception of the world, I think one of the biggest jumps or shift that we got was actually with the invention of the plane, right? It could actually change everything, because for the first time, maps before were like just kind of a very abstraction of what we thought of the world. But for the first time, we were there in the sky, and we could sit down and say, hey, actually, this is a bit like this, right? And we could start to have like this perception as humans of the planet, right? With that, we eliminated the idea of long distance, right? We started to operate through maps in different scales. It was not only like the 5 minutes of walking to another place, but now you could cross the ocean, right? And with this idea of being able to actually look from the sky, other things started to happen, right? Being able to understand the Earth from the sky, being able to see it with your own eyes, was also a way of understanding how to damage it, right? These are two important photographies. These are German bombers over London, so during the World War. And this is like one of the first aerial pictures during the First World War, too. And for me, somehow show how these wars were impossible to think of without the plane, without this idea of being on the top and looking down, right? And planes, therefore, became a central piece in the way we create cartography. And therefore, it was also a tool, obviously, of war, and they became maps themselves. This is a data visualization of American planes. So something that they did during the Second World War, when the planes came back from battle, they started to track where the gunshots were received, right? And they detected that there were like patterns. There were parts of the plane that received more gunshots than on the other ones. So they decided the most smart thing, no? That is, let's reinforce these parts to make it like stronger, so they can last for a longer time. And that changed nothing, right? That didn't improve anything. The planes were actually like destroyed in the same way that before. And it was not until Abraham Wald, a mathematician, came over and said in the 1940s, he said, well, actually, you are looking at the map in the wrong way, because you are looking only to the data of the planes that are coming back to the base. But actually, what we have to think of is about all the planes that never came back. And these are probably the planes that received gunshots in these parts, right? So somehow, this very non-logical, non-obvious perception of how data should be read is part also of how we read geography and time today. Just as a random moment, Abraham Wald died in an airplane, actually going to India to talk about this specific thing, which is a kind of a paradox. But nevertheless, it brought me to this idea of Hannah Arendt. Has man's conquest of the sky increased or diminished his stature? Right? He was somehow pointing this idea that the fact that we have more technological perspective, that we can see the world from the sky, right, doesn't make us bigger. It was a rhetoric question, of course, of that time. He was pointing out the idea that we are more than ever far away from ourselves, right? And part of the work that we are doing at Domestic is in exploring why this happens, why we don't understand the world, why there is this huge gap between the statistics and like the big quantities within the big problematics that are happening today in the world and our perception of them, right? And to do so, we have to go back to the 18th century, the 19th century, right? And this handsome man here is Gustav Theodor Fechner. He was a German philosopher and a physicist, and he was the inventor of psychophysics. Right? Psychophysics is a field that maybe some of you know a bit, but is a understanding of how our perception is kind of tricked sometimes. Right? So how many of you can spot the differences between these two frames? Please raise your hands. Quite fast. OK. There are 10 more points in this one compared to this one. Right? Now, let's do the same with this one. How many of you can spot the differences? It's a bit more complex, right? Yes. It's a bit more complex. But the fact is that there is the same difference. There are only 10 more points, right? This is clearly the problem of noise and quantity. And this is something that happens through all our perceptive senses. Psychophysics is still a research space that is studied today because it affects everything, every part of our life, every part of how we perceive the world and how the world is changing. Right? So it affects from sound, how we hear. Right? It's very different to be in a library than at Sonar Festival, of course, with light in the morning, in the night. It happens the same with money. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize of Economics, he's actually a psychology PhD, right? So he actually brought psychophysics into the field of economics to understand how we relate and connect with money. And it sadly happens in the same way with humans, with human lives, with the value that we give to humans. So the question there is, can you put yourself in the shoes of one person? Yes, most of the time. If you are not a psychopath, yes. But we do so, and this is one of the most kind of biological, evolutionary features of humans. We can connect because we are social animals. We need to connect to survive. We need to be able to connect with other humans to actually survive. And this has been exploited by our idea of storytelling. How we tell stories are very much connected to this idea of empathy towards one person, right? The way we have taken photographies, the way we have explained stories through images, the way we have created films and television series or video games, there was always this main character in the image, this main character in the game, this main character in the film that you will connect with, right? The problem comes with this question. Can you put yourself in the shoes of two people simultaneously? This is much more complex, right? Because we only have 2 feet. How we are going to put 2 feet in 4 shoes, right? This is kind of a psychological limitation of ourselves. We cannot do that. And Joan Capote, a Cuban artist, did like this beautiful, somehow manifestation of this weirdness and illogical thinking of empathy with these random shoes. I would love to test them at some point. But nevertheless, this points out how we somehow are limited. We don't have to feel bad about it. This is like part of our psychology. Right. Another important professor within the field of perception is Paul Slovic, and he's the inventor of the arithmetic of compassion, which is somehow transforming the value of human lives into mathematics. Again, from maps, from reality, from the universe, to calculations, to data points. Right? We do so to understand it, to perform renders of it. Right? He started his research after the Rwanda genocide. He said, we cannot wrap our head around the shame and responsible of big genocides, and still we are able to give our lives for one single person. He was pointing out how we can look to another way when there is like a catastrophic disaster, when there is like big numbers of people suffering. And when someone is suffering, one individual is suffering in front of us, like we connect so fast, right? So he did like this experiment that for me is like one of the most important experiments of the 20th century. He took a group of media newsroom from the United States, and he posted this advertising for Save the Children. In this advertising, you could see an image of Rokia, and it said, any money that you donate will go to Rokia, 7-year-old girl from Mali, Africa. Rokia is desperately poor and faces threat of severe hunger or even starvation. Her life will be changed for the better as a result of your financial gift, blah, 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 blah. Right? So it was, of course, like kind of 2000s advertising of Save the Children. But then he did another thing. He took a very similar group of media newsroom with very similar demographics, and he posted the same advertising. But this time, he added 2 more facts. He said, and as well as Rokia, there are 3 million people, 3 million kids in Malawi, and 3 other million kids in Zambia, right? And every time they have done this experiment, every time they have added this information, the donations to Rokia drop more than 40%, right? What the heck, no? The problem is bigger. Rationally, we should give more money to it. But the human brain, the nature of human brain is that we are somehow very selfish. Even if we are doing an altruistic act, we are thinking about the reward, even if it's a moral reward. But if the impact that we are having with our money is so little, it's a drop on the ocean, then we don't feel it like it's worth it, right? This is, of course, kind of entangled into our system. This is kind of one of my favorite graphics of all time. It's the graphic that shows the value of human life. It says, this is the normative model approved by the United Nations in the Human Rights Letter, right? So it says 1 human life is actually value 1. 2 human lives, value 2. Every human life have the same value, right? Probably most of us agree with this model. Then there is this one that I actually prefer, that it says 1 is value 1, but 2 is actually 2.1. And 1,000 is value 2,000, maybe. Because what you are saving is not only the biological life of these beings, but also the gastronomy, also the language, also the culture, also the relationships between all these people, right? So somehow, if we think rationally, mathematically about the value of human lives and big quantities of human lives, we will probably go in that direction. Still, the experiment that Paul Slovic did, he somehow points out a totally different perspective of how we value human life. The bigger the number, the less we feel, right? He called it the psychic numbing, or the collapse of compassion in a very dramatic fashion, right? And this is not something new. He was just demonstrating something that was told long ago. And it has been told by so many people. This was a sentence from the military board member of Joseph Stalin. He said, death is a tragedy. 1 million deaths are just a statistic, right? They were experts in killing people, so they knew what they were talking about. And actually, this is something that has been extended and explained so many different times. At the end, is 1 person matters, a data point doesn't. Right? This is kind of our inherently disconnection with the way we calculate the world. Right? Whenever we are creating these abstractions of the world, whenever we are reducing, whenever we are creating maps, we are somehow reducing the humanity in them. Sorry. So today I want to show a couple of experiments. The first is called Cartography of Human Attention, and it was first done at the Center of Contemporary Culture in Barcelona. The curators of this museum, they asked us how we could quantify, how we could datify the impact of different artworks in a museum with the people in there. And we will say, well, you cannot quantify the impact of art because art is subjective, right? So every person will have like a different life experience and will relate differently to a piece of art. But what we could do is to track the attention that it gives. So what we created was like a series of systems that will track the amount of time that people were spending in front of different artworks. And then we had all this data. We had like all this very reductionist way of perceiving an art experience. And then with that, we could go back to the museum and say, well, you should move this artwork to the end. Maybe this one, don't put it if there is like another exhibition of this one. But we were not interested in that. We wanted to see how actually this data could be actually triggering change in the behaviors of people. Right? So we said, what will happen if instead of just using facts and statistics and data, we show something different? We said, imagine that in this case, we take all the seconds, all the attention from the people, and we transform it into a metaphor, into a sun clock, right? An hourglass. And for every second someone is looking, watching one of these artworks, there will be a sun clock that will be leaving a bit of sun, right? Each of these sun clocks will be connected to one of the artworks. By creating this physical visualization, we will be able to create like a device, an artifact that will be able to physically encapsulate the attention of all the people. Right? So we did so. This was the final piece. And what was interesting about it, it was placed at the very end of the exhibition. And what was truly interesting is that when the people arrived there and saw the 5 different artworks that were tracked, they saw that there was one that was actually more seen than the others. And they went back to see it again because they wanted to know. Right? And this is something that is already happening a lot. Right? It's the same thing that happens in social media. Data affects us. It's not the same watching a post on Instagram that have over 1 million likes than one post that have 0 likes. Right? It's very different. There is an intrinsic value that we give to the data and statistics around objects. Right? Another thing that was really curious about this experience was that the day of the opening, I was doing like this tour with my family. I was very proud. And then we went through like the whole thing, and there was in front of one of the artworks that we were tracking, there was like this like elderly person watching the artwork. And then I finished the whole tour, and then I came back with a group of friends to do another tour after half an hour. And this elderly person was still there. And I asked him, are you feeling okay? Do you need anything? And he told me, yes, I'm good. Well, the only thing is that no one is spending that much time in this artwork, and I truly believe this is beautiful. So I'm just giving my time to it. Right? And I just realized about how someone was actually emotionally connected to a dead object, to a piece of art, just because we were making visible and physical kind of data that before was invisible, right? So I truly think there is a transformational power in reductionism. But reductionism not alone. Reductionism needs also physicality, needs a way to show what is the data. It cannot be just abstract numbers and statistics. We need something that we can touch, that we can smell, that we can feel. With the rise of artificial intelligence, a whole new space of cartography has been built up. And one of the biggest ones is on surveillance and cartographies of control. Right? So computing vision and facial recognition has been one of the more extended uses of artificial intelligence, even though there are like plenty of beautiful uses of artificial intelligence. I will not talk about this today. There is enough marketing already. But I truly think there are parts of this technology that, of course, should be taken accountable. One of them is surveillance and is affecting a lot of countries. In Spain, we have La Ley Mordaza. It happens very similar in France with the drones. In Hungary, it's even terrible. They used Pegasus, which is a kind of illegal software to spy on civil society. And UK have something similar. So they have even a system that when they detect more than 30 people in a place meeting together, they send over automatically with an algorithm a police squad. Right? So this is algorithmic policing. And this is not only happening in the governance, it's also happening in the commercial and private space. This is one of the demos that the company did to Starbucks to actually track the productivity of their employees. Right? So surveillance and artificial intelligence is kind of connected in some of its uses, of course. And for me, of course, it is devastating to understand that we have such a wonderful technology and we use it specifically for this kind of control. There is this quote from Sherry Rabinowitz, which I love, artists must create on the same scale that society has the capacity to destroy, which kind of makes me anxious because the capacity of destruction is quite big. But there are a lot of artists, right? So they should cover at least a small percentage of the destruction. And when we started to think about controlling tools and artificial intelligence, we said, what will happen if instead of making surveillance coming from the French violence over vigilance, what will happen if we do the contrary, if we do bottom-up surveillance? Because, of course, in parliaments and government spaces, there are a lot of cameras, and you can check on these cameras in parliament. Some of they have actually streaming cameras real-time during the sessions. This was something that the Dries de Porter did with the Flemish scrollers doing in the Belgian parliament. And we extended this to 36 parliaments. We created a system to actually track every time a politician falls asleep, right? So we started to create like all this open source system so it can be applied to other countries, and started to create like a cartography of sleepiness, a cartography of how tired are these politicians of doing like this beautiful work that they are doing. Right now we are working out in creating like these systems in a way that can be real-time posted into Twitter and actually hashtagging the politicians so they can wake up. And of course, a big part of the work is not in making the system and, of course, using this humor or humoristic part, but is somehow a way of exploiting and saying this technology should be not in only one hands. Like this technology can actually be in a lot of people's hands, and instead of creating maps of control, they can actually start to be built upon the idea of maps of accountability, right? Because control can go two ways. And this is the way I want to finish this. We are in their need of the maps and clocks of tomorrow. We need to create like these new ways of building up cartography. These are only just two examples of it, but there are like several other examples. And some of them we can look back in history. These are the Quipu maps from the Inca Empire. It said that it's the only written language from the Inca Empire, which at the point it was using Quechua as an oral language. And how these maps worked, this kind of language was a series of knots that will be collected in a rope, right? And they will have it on their own. So you will be actually able to see by the fashion style of someone how far that person had gone, to which villages they have been, right? So it was not only map, it was also a way of talking about the human experience connected to this map, right? In the same way, there are other maps. These are the Mele Polynesian maps. These are the maps that were developed by the wayfinders, right? These were people that were actually dealing in the 1000 before Christ. They were actually dealing with finding the right way through the seas, through the Pacific Ocean seas, that maybe some of you know it's a very difficult sea to navigate. So because the fear that they experienced, they started to create these chants. And these chants will actually be songs that will define very well all the geographical accidents, the songs and the sounds of the birds, depending on the way they were and the space that they were doing. And they were memorized together. The function of these songs were not only to be maps of the coast, but were also to actually create this collective sense of security, where when you are singing with a group of people, you feel that you are part of it, you feel more protected. So the map was not only showing a very pragmatic way to get from one way to the other, but was also a way to feeling safe from one way to the other. And maps can be built in so many ways. Right? This is in the Michigan State University, and the architects that built it did something that I find it very humbling. In this case, they built up the whole campus, these buildings over here, and then they said, but we don't know which are the best ways to build the roads. So what they did, they planted grass, just grass. And for a year, they just let the people walk around. And after a year, they took this image, this very pixelated image, by the way, and they started to see which were the patterns. And these were not very rational paths in some cases. These are paths that were made by people walking through it, right? So maps can also be a way of creating together, creating a map that is still empty and can be filled by the people that have to further develop a design, an idea, a future. It's important. To end up, I wanted to finish with this experience. A couple of months ago, years ago, we were researching about a video game exhibition and the impacts that video games are having in the world. And I ended up in this kind of beautiful story. I was watching YouTube videos of a video game that I used to play as a kid, calling McRae Rally. And in the comments of the YouTube video, I saw this story of this kid. He was saying that when he was 6 years old, his father, for Christmas, gave him as present like this video game, calling McRae Rally, the Xbox, blah, blah, blah. And they played a lot together. The thing is that his father was very competitive, so he will never let the kid win. But they will play a lot together. It was kind of their bonding space, right? And sadly, after 4 years, he died. He had cancer and he died. And the kid was so sad about this whole situation that he could not play anymore with this video game. It was reminding him a lot of his father and the time they spent together, so he left the video game into the closet. It was not until 10 years later that one day he went back to their motorhome and he started to play to this video game again, just like kind of this nostalgic moment. And when he was playing, he had like this map, and he started to see another point in the map. He saw something that was following him, and then he discovered what it was. This is called the ghost car, right? The ghost car is when the fastest lap that you have played before is recorded and reproduced, rendered, physically, like digitally rendered into the game, so you can actually improve like the mark, right? And then he realized that because his father was very competitive and he would always win, that was actually his father. And he started to play again after 10 years with his father. What I feel it's interesting from this experience and this example is that no one from Xbox, like PlayStation, calling McRae Rally, no one of the designers or the coders never thought that this was a possibility. They never designed this system to exist like it. But it's truly, probably for me, one of the most emotional and human experiences that I have ever heard on video games, right? And again, it's very much connected of this idea of trapping reality and rendering it. We have all these potential ways to build maps. There is this word from Montserrat Roig, a beautiful Catalan writer, who said, si hi ha un acte d'amor, aquest és la memòria. If there is an act of love, it is to remember. And the question that I want you to have in your minds is that a map at the end is a way to render the world, but also a way to remember it. And if we frame it with this idea of love and humanity, it can actually change the way we perceive like the new maps, the new renders. That's it. Thank you very much.